One of the largest and some of the most valuable slate deposits in the UK resides in the stunning countryside of Wales. It's not known when the mining of slate began, but the industry dates back to Roman times. Slate was extracted and transported by hand as far away as Ireland, but the process would take weeks and the output was small. So small, in fact, that local landowners could easily set up small holdings that would literally scratch the surface in terms of mining. The beginning of the 19th century saw an increase in the demand for slate, and both the means to extract and transport slate had improved. The promised use of railway engines and its apparent success in other areas prompted many Welsh quarries to adopt their own lines, and the Lake Railway near Llanbris is no exception. The mountain quarry of Llanbris was also facing its own challenges. The only way to get the slate to the port was by using a mix of boat and horse and cart, with the occasional sledge for larger orders. It severely restricted output. In 1809, following the purchase of the Dinorwic quarry, investor Thomas Asherton Smith started to improve the transport system almost overnight. His goal was to expand the quarry, and he ordered the laying of a tramway that horses and sleds could use. The Slate Road, as it was called, would move several tons a day, but it was still slow working. In 1823, to move more slate, the line was extended to the port. While the line was an improvement, it still wasn't ideal, as it intersected lands the quarry didn't own and had to pay rent for, and the quarry owners had to contend with free inclines, which caused bottlenecks. By now, the quarry owners had had enough and wanted to redesign the tramway. Firstly, the gauge was changed from 2 foot to 4 foot, and the railway turned to locomotive company Alfred Horlock of Kent for locomotive power. The company was founded by its namesake in 1847, and it was more of a mixed bag than a dedicated locomotive works, but was ready to take on the challenge of making 2 locomotives for the new railway. The engines were called Jenny Lind and Fire Queen, and they were made to a Crompton design. Crompton locomotives are very distinctive thanks to its squat boiler and large driving wheels. Because the driving wheels were set back, they could be made larger and gave the engine a low centre of gravity. This made it perfect for the narrow gauge tracks. The engine type was used and produced all over the world, but for the Alfred Horlock Company, only 2 engines would be produced, and both found their way onto the new line. The company stayed in operation for just a few more years, where a series of burglaries hit the company hard, and by 1853 the business folded and the remaining assets were sold. The railway was cleverly constructed for productivity. Special host wagons were built that would hold in itself complete trains from the smaller 2-foot gauge lines that ran within the quarry itself. It meant that the slate could be taken to the port without any unloading from the railway. The workers would also mutually benefit from the railway's construction. Beforehand, the workers would have to hike to the quarry or be forced to live in makeshift towns or barracks. To help, the directors would allow the men to use velocipedes and pump cars to get to the quarry. The pump cars were normally owned and maintained by the workers themselves. The railway had no formal agreement to transport workers, but were fully aware that the men were using the carts to travel up and down. In 1892, the railway decided to make a dedicated train to take the workers. The train would be safer than the pumps and the velocipedes, but riders were still told to travel at their own risk, and there was no seating. It wasn't a comfortable ride. In time, bowing to pressure from workers, carriages were built for the comfort and stations added. Finally, an owner's saloon was commissioned so the directors were able to traverse the rails in style. By now, the twin engines were getting old, and the railway turned to the leading small engine company, Hunslet, to make new ones. 3 engines were delivered: Dinorwic, Pandora and Vanelli. All 3 engines would work right up until the end of the quarry. Both the quarry and the railway would continue for the next 60 years. However, by the turn of the 1960s, the quarry was in crisis. Not only were cheaper materials being produced elsewhere, but the quarry was seeing a decline in their workforce. With new opportunities in towns and cities that were safer and better paid, the young workforce were leaving behind the work of their forefathers and were going to work elsewhere. Families that had worked in the quarry for generations were now abandoning it. In a last-ditch effort, the quarry pitched the slate overseas, but the deals failed and the quarry collapsed. After almost 160 years of service, the very last job the railway engines performed was to take up their own rails before the engines were sold. But this is not the end of the story. Almost straight away there were calls to preserve a part of the railway as a heritage line. The lakeside portion of the line boasted some of the best views. It needed investment, and local man Alan Lowry Porter was determined to bring the railway back. The line would run from the mining town of Llanbris all around the east shore of the lake and terminating at the Paddon County Park. By 1970, the land had been purchased by the council for the railway's use, and Porter had purchased 3 steam engines from the auctions. In fact, the very same steam engines that once ran on the quarry line. In addition, 3 further diesel engines were added to the roster. Many other steam engines that ran on the Dinorwic Railway also survived, including the Fire Queen. The Fire Queen is the only survivor from the Alfred Hawlock Company. Having worked the quarry line, she was hidden away in a shed right up until the railway was closed. She was placed in the auction, and there was a real risk she wouldn't make it. Luckily, Parliament member John Smith preserved the engine, and he brought it to the Penrhyn Castle Railway Museum, where it remained until 2024, when it was moved to the Vale of Rheidol Railway. She holds the record of being the oldest narrow-gauge railway in existence. Today, almost like a time capsule, many of the buildings, the workshop and a lot of the machines still survive. The majority of the slate buildings are restricted. However, if you want to go and see them for yourself, please be careful. Many of the buildings have partially collapsed and the roofs have either collapsed or halfway there. There are many machines still in situ, some with sharp edges or parts, and slate on the ground can be loose underfoot. When looking though, it's best not to touch anything or go near any of the buildings. But the quarry, even in its state today, can still tell a story, and in some places it's almost as if the workers simply downed tools and walked never to return. As for the railway, it's still going strong and has completed a terminus close to the iconic Snowdon Mountain Railway. It's a stunning little line that serves the National Slate Museum and Dolbaran Castle. The line is thriving and established itself as a strong member of the Great Little Trains of Wales.